Most people imagine mental strength as confidence, willpower, or fearlessness. But Buddhism sees it differently. Real strength isn't the ability to dominate life, but the ability to stay with life as it is, without collapsing into avoidance, fantasy, or self-hatred. The strong mind isn't loud or aggressive, it's steady. It can acknowledge discomfort without running, notice fear without worshipping it, and remain present long enough to choose a response instead of a reaction. And here's the part most people miss. Mental strength isn't an inborn trait. It's a skill. It can be trained, cultivated, practiced, and expanded the same way a musician trains their ear or a monk trains their breath. The mind you're living with today isn't a finished product. It's simply the version shaped by habit, culture, and survival. Most of us were never taught how to train it. We were only taught how to cope. In this video, we're going to explore 7 Buddhist disciplines that reshape the way you think, feel, and relate to the world. They are subtle, quiet, and grounded. Nothing flashy, nothing mystical. But if you stay with them, you may begin to see that mental strength is not reserved for the confident or fearless. It belongs to anyone who is willing to train. By the end, you might recognize something surprising. The mind you've been living inside all these years was never fixed. It was simply untrained. Gate 1. Cleaning the lens of perception. The mind does not experience life directly. It experiences life through a lens. When that lens becomes stained with negativity, pessimism, or old emotional residue, reality becomes distorted. The world itself has not changed, but the way it appears has. This is the first fracture of an untrained mind. It does not see clearly, so it cannot respond wisely. In Buddhist psychology, perception shapes feeling, and feeling shapes craving or aversion. Before we are even aware of it, the mind has already interpreted what happened and assigned meaning to it. We often assume our thoughts are objective observations, but they are edits layered on top of raw experience. A cloudy lens can turn inconvenience into catastrophe, silence into rejection, or uncertainty into threat. When perception is distorted, suffering multiplies even without external hardship. Training begins with noticing how quickly the mind creates stories. Someone does not reply to a message, and the mind concludes it is being ignored. Plans fall apart, and the mind declares everything is ruined. Small setbacks become personal failures. These interpretations feel automatic because the mind has repeated them for years. They are not facts. They are habits of perception that have gone unchallenged. Cleaning the lens means slowing down the chain. Instead of collapsing into the first interpretation, we pause and examine the perception itself. What actually happened? What was added by expectation, fear, memory, or insecurity? This act of inquiry restores clarity. When perception becomes accurate, emotional reaction becomes proportionate, and life becomes less hostile. A clear lens does not make life perfect. It makes it workable. Challenges remain challenges, but they are no longer magnified by catastrophizing or poisoned by pessimism. What once felt overwhelming becomes manageable simply because the mind is no longer amplifying it. As this gate develops, mental strength begins to emerge naturally. The person who sees accurately does not need to be fearless or aggressive. Clarity itself becomes a form of power. It is the foundation of resilience because it prevents the mind from turning life into something heavier than it is. Gate 2. Surrendering the second arrow. Life will always deliver the first arrow. These are the events we cannot fully control: loss, illness, mistakes, conflict, traffic, delays, weather, and the unpredictable movement of other people. The first arrow hurts, but it is part of being human. Nobody escapes it. What destroys the mind is not the first arrow, but the second one. The second arrow is how we react to what already happened. Complaining about what we cannot change, replaying past events, ruminating on imagined scenarios, or resisting reality as if refusal could undo it. The second arrow often hurts far more than the first, and we are the ones who fire it. This is the mechanism behind unnecessary suffering. The external situation may be unpleasant, but the internal resistance multiplies the pain. A cancelled plan becomes catastrophe. A single mistake becomes identity. A passing emotion becomes a personal weakness. The mind keeps stabbing itself long after the moment has passed. Most people try to change the world so they can feel better. Buddhism teaches the opposite. Instead of trying to control every situation, we learn to master our reaction to it. The situation may not change at all, but the suffering decreases. This is real mental strength, the ability to let the first arrow be the only arrow. Training begins by noticing resistance. Pay attention to the moment the mind starts arguing with reality. I should not be stuck here. They should not treat me this way. This should not have happened. Resistance feels righteous, but it keeps the wound open. Surrender is not defeat. It is an intelligent strategy. When the mind stops fighting what is already here, clarity returns and energy becomes available for action. Acceptance redirects attention toward what can actually be influenced instead of what is already fixed. As this gate strengthens, a new identity begins to form within you. You become someone who does not add unnecessary suffering on top of the unavoidable kind. The storms of life do not disappear, but you stop wounding yourself with your own reactions, and that alone is a profound form of freedom. Gate 3. Removing the mask. Most people walk through life wearing a mask, not out of malice, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of disappointing others, fear of not fitting the script they believe they must perform. Suppressing true thoughts and feelings may keep the peace temporarily, but it divides a person from their own life. The performer survives. The authentic self suffocates. The mind pays a heavy price for this performance. Suppression creates internal friction. It forces the nervous system into vigilance, always monitoring how it appears, always editing, always adjusting. Over time, this becomes exhaustion disguised as normal life. In Buddhist psychology, this is called the tension of self-making, the continuous effort to maintain an image rather than inhabit reality. Right speech does not only refer to how we speak to others, it also includes how honestly we express what is alive within us. When expression aligns with inner truth, there is coherence. When expression is curated for approval, there is fragmentation. Fragmentation is mentally expensive. Coherence is mentally liberating. Removing the mask is not about oversharing or turning life into confession. It is about no longer abandoning yourself in the face of others. It means allowing thoughts and feelings to move through speech rather than storing them in silence. Journaling, voice reflection, and mindful conversation begin to loosen the grip of performance. Expression becomes clean rather than reactive. Connection arises not from perfection, but from honesty. When you reveal even a small glimpse of your interior world, others recognize themselves in it. Isolation weakens the mind. Recognition strengthens it. The human nervous system was never designed to survive alone behind a mask. It was designed to co-regulate through authenticity. As this gate develops, relief begins to replace tension. You begin to inhabit your own life instead of merely portraying it. The performance ends, the inner noise quiets, and a subtle identity shift takes root. You become someone who shows up without pretending, someone who can be seen, not curated. That alone restores a tremendous amount of mental strength. Gate 4. Repairing the internal locus. One of the fastest ways the mind loses strength is by outsourcing responsibility. When difficulty arises, blame feels comforting. It directs frustration outward and temporarily protects the ego. But the long-term consequence is subtle and destructive. Each time we blame, we teach the mind that our life is shaped by forces we cannot influence. This is how a victim identity forms, even without realizing it. Buddhism approaches responsibility differently than modern self-help. It does not say everything is your fault. It says everything you do carries weight. Karma in its original form does not mean cosmic reward or punishment. It means action. More specifically, intention-driven action. In this framing, responsibility is not about fault, it is about authorship. When authorship is absent, the mind becomes passive. It watches life happen rather than participating in it. Learned helplessness grows quietly from repeated avoidance. The person stops asking, "What can I do?" and starts asking, "Why does this always happen to me?" The moment that shift takes place, the mind becomes fragile. Fragile minds collapse under pressure because they no longer believe in their ability to influence outcomes. Repairing the internal locus means returning attention to what can be shaped. It means observing where you actually have agency. The external world may not obey, but the response always remains within your domain. You cannot control whether someone likes you, but you can control how you communicate. You cannot control the timing of loss, but you can control how you care for yourself afterward. You cannot control the complexity of life, but you can train your ability to meet life skillfully. Each time you choose action over blame, the nervous system registers capability. Capability compounds. The mind builds evidence that it can intervene in its own life. This becomes empowerment in the most literal sense, power that comes from within rather than from circumstance. Forgiveness also plays a role in this gate, not because others deserve it, but because blame keeps you bound. Blame ties your identity to a story you had no hand in shaping. When that story dissolves, responsibility fills the space. And responsibility is a far sturdier foundation than resentment. As this gate matures, identity shifts once again. You stop waiting for life to cooperate before you move. You begin to act even when conditions are imperfect. You become someone who steers even in storms. The mind becomes strong not because life gets easier, but because it no longer collapses into helplessness. That is the essence of internal locus, and one of the core architectures of mental strength. Gate 5. Converting imagination into action. The human mind is gifted with imagination. It can envision futures, create possibilities, and build entire worlds that do not yet exist. This capacity is a form of intelligence, but without discipline, it becomes a trap. Fantasizing offers pleasure without consequence. It allows a person to taste the rewards of achievement without engaging in the difficulty that achievement demands. It feels productive, but it is nourishment without calories. Eventually, it weakens rather than strengthens. Buddhism identifies this pattern in the structure of intention. Intention precedes action, and action generates karma, meaning volitional consequence. When imagination is detached from intention, it becomes escapism. The future becomes a screen for projection, rather than a field for cultivation. The mind indulges in the idea of change without engaging in the labor of transformation. This is how dreams become substitutes for discipline. Escapism often thrives during discomfort. When life becomes heavy or progress feels slow, the mind retreats into a fantasy of how things could be if conditions were perfect. Imagining a better life is harmless until it becomes the primary strategy for coping. Future indulgence temporarily relieves anxiety, but it prevents the nervous system from learning how to tolerate uncertainty, boredom, or imperfection. The result is a life lived in imagination rather than in reality. Converting imagination into action begins by tightening the link between intention and behavior. Instead of dreaming about the final outcome, focus on the first actionable step. Instead of imagining success, imagine the process. Instead of visualizing the victory, visualize the training. This shift grounds imagination in volitional formation. The mind moves from the pleasure of fantasizing to the clarity of doing. Break a vision into practical components. A desired skill becomes practice sessions. A desired lifestyle becomes daily routines. A desired transformation becomes small behaviors executed repeatedly. Progress becomes real, not when the fantasy becomes richer, but when the rituals become consistent. Reality responds to sustained behavior, not to imagined futures. This gate also develops resilience. Action exposes the individual to feedback. Feedback reveals what is lacking. Lack demands growth. Fantasy protects the ego from failure. Action strengthens the ego through failure. This is why fantasies feel safer. They offer triumph without risk. But triumph without risk does not build mental strength. Struggle does. When imagination is harnessed correctly, it becomes fuel rather than fog. It supplies direction, context, and meaning to the work being done. But it does not replace the work. Over time, identity shifts. You stop dreaming of the person you could be and begin behaving like the person you intend to become. The future stops floating above you like wings and begins supporting you from below like feet. As this gate matures, imagination and action unify. Dreams begin to materialize not through wishing, but through practice. The mind grows stronger because it no longer retreats into possibility. It moves forward into reality. Gate 6. Returning to the village. Mental strength is often misunderstood as the ability to stand alone, endure alone, and solve alone. Modern culture celebrates the self-made individual, the lone warrior, the isolated genius. But the nervous system was not designed for isolation. It evolved for connection. When disconnection becomes normal, the mind begins to deteriorate quietly from the inside. Loneliness does not always announce itself with sadness. Sometimes it appears as numbness, irritability, or exhaustion. Buddhist philosophy offers a corrective to this modern misunderstanding. It teaches interdependence, the recognition that everything arises in relation to everything else. No one grows in isolation. No one heals in isolation. Even monks who live in silence belong to a sangha, a community that sustains their path. The mind becomes stronger, not by rejecting others, but by recognizing that human connection is part of the training. In a hyper-individualistic society, relationships are often seen as optional, secondary, or inconvenient. Work takes precedence. Productivity becomes identity. Digital interactions replace presence. But without shared attention, shared vulnerability, and shared reality, the psychological foundation weakens. The mind loses one of its most reliable forms of regulation, being understood by another human being. Returning to the village does not mean surrounding yourself with many people. It means nurturing intentional relationships that provide psychological shelter. Shelter does not remove storms. It allows you to endure them without collapsing. A single conversation with someone who listens can restore clarity faster than days spent ruminating alone. Biologically, co-regulation is older than language. It is how mammals survive uncertainty. Connection also strengthens compassion. Compassion is not merely kindness. It is the recognition that others, like you, have an interior world filled with fear, hope, confusion, and longing. When compassion grows, judgment decreases. When judgment decreases, the mind relaxes. A relaxed mind perceives with more precision and reacts with less hostility. These qualities are dimensions of mental strength, not weaknesses to be hidden. Relationships are often neglected until crisis reveals their importance. But strength is built long before difficulty arrives. Checking in, listening deeply, expressing affection, asking for help, and showing up create a foundation that isolation cannot replicate. The mind becomes more resilient because it does not have to hold everything alone. As this gate develops, identity shifts away from the myth of the solitary warrior. You become someone who is strong because they are connected, not isolated. Connection becomes a form of intelligence. Community becomes a form of stability. And the village becomes part of the architecture of a strong mind. Gate 7. treating failure as a teacher. Failure is one of the most misunderstood experiences in human life. Many minds collapse not because failure is unbearable, but because the meaning attached to failure is intolerable. Shame, avoidance, and self-criticism arise not from the event itself, but from the assumption that failure reveals something permanent about who we are. When failure becomes identity, resilience dies. Buddhism approaches failure through a different lens. It teaches impermanence, non-self, and the process view of becoming. Impermanence reveals that no state, success or failure lasts forever. Non-self reveals that no single event defines the evolving person. And the process view reminds us that life unfolds through practice, adjustment, and repetition. In this framework, failure ceases to be a verdict. It becomes information. Avoidance is the first enemy of growth. When a person avoids tasks that might expose their inadequacy, the mind remains untested. Untested minds become fragile. The smallest mistakes feel catastrophic because the nervous system has no experience with recovery. This avoidance strategy seems protective, but it ensures the very weakness it tries to prevent. Treating failure as a teacher requires curiosity. Curiosity softens the defensive reflex. Instead of collapsing into shame, the mind begins to ask useful questions. What happened? What was missing? What did I expect? What can be adjusted? Curiosity transforms failure into feedback, and feedback is the raw material of mastery. Every skill, from walking to speaking to meditation, was built through repeated failure. The body knows this truth. The ego resists it. Impermanence provides comfort. It reminds the practitioner that failure is only temporary. No matter how disappointing the moment feels, it will pass. Non-self adds another layer of protection. It breaks the illusion that mistakes define the entire self. When there is no fixed self to defend, there is no catastrophe in trying again. The mind becomes free to experiment. The strongest minds are not those who never fail, but those who recover quickly. Recovery becomes easier when failure is treated as a normal part of the path. Progress becomes a rhythm. Attempt, fail, observe, adjust, attempt again. Over time, failure loses its sting because it no longer threatens identity. It becomes a natural part of training. As this gate matures, a shift in identity emerges. You stop running from the experiences that others fear. You stop collapsing under the weight of mistakes. You become someone who absorbs failure and turns it into fuel. The world does not become less challenging, but you become harder to discourage. Mental strength forms not through perfection, but through persistence. And persistence requires a mind that treats failure as a teacher rather than an enemy. In the end, mental strength has never been the absence of difficulty. It is the ability to remain intact while life moves through change, uncertainty, and discomfort. The untrained mind reacts to every disturbance. The trained mind responds with intention. This difference is not small. It is the difference between being pushed by life and being carried by it. Training does not require grand moments. It happens quietly, in the ordinary decisions you make each day, in how you speak, in how you imagine, in how you relate to others, and in how you recover from failure. You do not need more confidence to endure the world. You need less interference from old habits, unexamined stories, and defensive reactions that make life heavier than it needs to be. When those layers fall away, the mind becomes lighter, more precise, and less afraid. Strength in nature rarely appears as force. The bamboo does not survive storms by resisting the wind. It survives by bending. Flexibility does not weaken it. Flexibility protects it. The same is true for the mind. If this form of training resonates with you, stay close. The path is quiet, but it leads far. And the person who walks it does not simply become stronger. They become unshakable in a way that requires no performance at all.